What's up, Dragon Brood? So, a lot of you are trying to get better at deck building, and it's like a constant quest in Magic because the game's always changing and they're always adding new cards and we get new keywords. So sometimes things you've learned for deck building don't necessarily apply. Like, for instance, we recently got a lot of double face cards that actually have lands on the backside. Well, that definitely changed how we built decks for sure. But there are some things you can do to kind of dodge the potholes in the road, so to speak, when you're making a deck and making life a little bit easier on yourself. I want to say some people might get their feelings hurt watching this. There's going to be some pretty on the nose information, I guess, and it might be a little harsh. So please take that into account going forward. This isn't an attack on anybody. This isn't me calling out any particular type of player. These are just things I see all the time whenever people are asking for help with decks and the hurdles they keep running into. But let's get into it. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about when deck building is we all start out with these grand ideas, but you kind of still have to keep things kind of in focus. And what I mean by that is you can't just think about what we like to call Magic Christmas Land or the best case scenario for your deck. Like, yes, we all want to play the crazy 2 and 3 card combos that do these awesome big things, but we also have to balance the deck so we can survive to points where we can actually do the big things. And unfortunately, I see a lot of players complain about, like, well, no, this is here for this like crazy big thing to happen whenever you try to question a card. And yes, I get it. I understand why that card's there. But what if you never reach the point in the game where you get to do that? How are you going to get these cards into your hand? What happens if one of those cards gets countered or somebody makes you discard it? Well, what does the rest of the deck do if you don't get those two cards together? Like, that can also lead you down a road of every single card being put in there just for that magic big moment that's going to happen. But if that moment doesn't happen, well, now you've got like 25 other cards that are kind of just sitting in your deck, doing nothing, waiting for the big situation. That's really a bad way to go about building a deck. And that's probably why so many people struggle when they have this grand idea, but it never really comes to fruition. So, my first rule there is you gotta stop just focusing on the big event, right? At the end of the day, you have to have your deck do something else other than that one big thing. As evidence on my channel, I play a lot of different decks on this channel, and we play a lot of big cards that do big things. But we also have to play things to maybe remove your opponent's small creatures that are trying to bum rush you. Maybe something to get you something early so your opponent has to spend some resources before you get your big creature or big enchantment or whatever. Force them to spend those counter spells early so they don't get to sit on them for 5, 6, 7 turns. You know, those type of things are important when you're trying to get to that big, awesome thing. So keep that in mind. All right, to my second point, I'm not really sure the best way to word this. I'm going to go with just a combination of getting tunnel vision and getting defensive. I think these kind of go together. And what I'm getting to here is that a lot of people will say, well, I have this deck that wants to do this thing, but I need help. And then they'll go to people who actually have more experience, or might just outright be better at the game than them, or might even be a specialist in that type of deck, or maybe those cards. And then they'll just want to argue with them. Every time they give them some input, they want to say, well, hey, maybe have you considered adding this card, or changing this thing? And ultimately, they'll say, well, no, that's here for this reason. Or no, I don't want to take that out because of this. And then after about 5 questions, the person you're talking to is literally going to be thinking in their head, okay, do you want me to just tell you this is a good deck and send you on your way? Because now they're in a situation where they're trying to be helpful and also not be rude because they don't know what else to tell you at this point. Like, the reality is, if you're going to go to somebody or even a group of people that you're trying to source information from, this is going to sound harsh, but shut up and listen. Like, the reason is that I will say, okay, my streams as an example, right? I get a lot of new faces that come by, people that just started playing Magic or just got in because of Arena. Sometimes they'll ask questions or they'll make a suggestion that maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but you know what? There's been times that I've walked away after a stream and been like, that thing this person mentioned, I don't necessarily like that card, but I like this other thing that's similar. Maybe I should try putting that in the deck and see what happens. So even those ideas can lead to the next thought that could be your big epiphany. Not that epiphany, but you get what I'm saying. And ultimately, you need to just listen. If you're going to get help, get advice, great. It's okay for people to not like what you're doing. It's okay for people not to agree with what you're doing. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to shut them out whenever you're trying to get advice. So definitely don't get defensive whenever somebody's trying to help you with the deck. Just accept it as help. Whether you use the advice or not is up to you. But take all the advice in, because you never know where the next big piece of information or the thing that jumpstarts your next awesome idea is even going to come from. All right, this one's classic, always comes up, and it's a really big new player mistake. But you can't jam an answer for every single thing into your deck, right? I see this all the time. The problem ends up being you end up with like 8 to 12 cards that actually do something or actually productive. And then you have a whole bunch of weird ones and twos of all these different things that kind of only work in particular situations, right? Like you might have a thing like, let's say, maybe something that removes a graveyard, but it does nothing else for the rest of your deck. So if you draw it and you're not playing against something that cares about the graveyard, now you just have an absolutely dead card. Maybe you're playing something that, I don't know, like only does damage in a certain situation, or maybe you're worried about having a different type of counterspell for things that cost 4 or more, for creatures, for artifacts, or whatever. Like, why not just have 2 or 3 copies of a regular thing that just counters target spell? Call it a day, right? There's just people worried about jamming too much stuff into their decks that ultimately takes your deck from being playable to just being unplayable. It ends up just being kind of like a weird Swiss Army knife, which is great, but how often do you actually use all the tools in that Swiss Army knife? Like, almost never. I think everybody I know who's ever owned one always wonders when they're going to use that weird toothpicky thing that's in there. Like, nobody ever uses that, but it's there. So I don't know. But it's that type of thing, right? You're putting cards in that you may ultimately never use. Now, understand, yes, that will leave you weak to some different types of strategies. Well, that's magic. It's going to happen. Every deck has weaknesses. Every deck's going to have some problems. That's one of the reasons a lot of the competitive players play best of 3, because you get a sideboard. And that's where you can put all those 1 to 3 copies of different things you want for specific matchups, right? If you want to put those things that target a graveyard, great. If you want to have more counters for expensive spells, great. Like, they can live there. But you can't necessarily jam those into every main deck, or else you're just weakening your deck against, well, pretty much everything. Now, I'll say, kind of in conjunction with that last rule, the next thing is understanding what you're building for. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will put cards in without a real purpose or idea, and they're ignoring, say, the format they may be building for. For example, let's say you want to build a deck, but you haven't included any early spells, right? But the format's full of aggressive decks and aggressive creatures. Well, if you're not really doing anything to your opponent's creatures before turn 3, where there's a good chance you might be dead or close to dead come turn 4, 5, 6 before your deck even really starts to play any relevant spells. That's not really where you want to be. So you have to understand what the format is that you're building for. Also understand that formats can change even in the matter of a few weeks. So whenever you're deck building, always try to check in and see what decks are people actually playing with right now. And this applies also to things like historic, to modern, even to commander, right? Are you playing mostly with 2 or 3 friends that play the same like 6 commander decks? Well, if so, you build with that in mind, right? You want defenses. You want to be able to stop their combos, or deal with their graveyard, or protect your creatures from board sweepers, or whatever it is you know their decks do. But if you want to play against just random people when you go to your local game store, or maybe you go to a convention or a Grand Prix, well, then you need more diverse options because you don't know what you're going to run into, right? This applies to every type of deck building for every type of format. You have to understand what you're building it for. Otherwise, you're just going to jam cards in, sort of hoping, well, if this random thing comes up, maybe this will work. And again, that actually applies maybe when you're talking about, well, I want to make a commander deck for this big convention I'm going to, because I'm going to play probably 6 or 7 hours of commander with probably 8 or 9 different people. Great. Then you want diverse options. But if I'm sitting there and I'm going to play with my same 3 or 4 friends I play with on a weekly basis, and I already know what commanders they play, then why am I wasting time putting these other cards in there that I'm never going to need? All right, and my fifth point here, and this one's a little bit simpler, just understanding when you have cards that don't really work together. Like, I see this happen all the time where people are worried, and this kind of comes back to people worrying about putting answers into a deck that they don't even know if they're going to need, but then ultimately ending up with things that don't work together. Coming back to some earlier examples where we're talking about something like a Scavenging Ooze, well, that's great, right? You can use it to remove a graveyard and then put a bunch of counters on your Scavenging Ooze. However, if you're playing something like Elspeth's Nightmare in the same deck, well then, Elspeth's Nightmare is going to remove the graveyard anyway. So then there's nothing for your Scavenging Oozes to eat. So maybe you should be finding another creature in that spot instead of playing that alongside the Elspeth's Nightmare. Or choose to play the creatures and then play another discard spell potentially or removal card instead of playing Elspeth's Nightmare. So you still get the versatility and the things you want for your deck, but you don't have cards that are competing with space. Otherwise, you're going to get in too many situations where when you get the cards that clash with each other, like, they're actually not going to do anything. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to be a bunch of feel bads because you're going to be sitting here going like, man, if I had a graveyard, I could have like a 6/6 Scavenging Ooze right now. Well, that's unfortunate. You know, those type of things. So again, it's a small thing, but it really has a big impact and it can save you a lot of pain and in some cases even heartache because we do get attached to our deck list. Now, all that being said, don't ever take anything personally whenever you're building a deck. Like, yes, we can have great ideas and we all get attached to our favorite cards or favorite decks or favorite deck styles. And it sucks to find out the deck we put together doesn't work. But understand that even when you see your favorite content creators, most of us are building decks all week, all the time. And not all of them make it to camera. Heck, I can tell you every season I probably trash about 20 or 25 decks that I don't even take into the play queue because they look like garbage when I get done with them. So everybody has decks that just don't go anywhere or have ideas that don't work. Like, that's totally okay. Some of the best pro players have gone into their play groups to try to prepare for a weekend, and a deck they think is great, within 3 days of testing, they've already decided it's garbage and they don't even want to look at it again. And those are the best players in the world. So understand that it's okay. You're going to have decks that don't work. Take advice and make them better. Also understand that you know what? Here's a good one. Here's a sixth one. Here's a freebie. Don't worry about being original. And don't take that the wrong way. I'm not saying don't have new ideas, don't try to innovate or whatever, nothing like that. Keep doing that. Keep trying to come up with cool, fun things. But don't get caught up on the idea that you have to play a certain card so your deck's different. Or you can't play a certain thing because other people play this card. The reality is if it's just the best card available for what you're trying to do, it's the best card available for what you're trying to do. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's not going to be worth it. I mean, put this in perspective. At any given time, there are probably some, 10 million Magic players out in the world. And especially because of stuff like Magic Online and Arena, we probably have some hundreds of millions of matches being played around the world between the digital stuff and the paper stuff. To think that you're the only one that's ever thought of the idea or that combination of cards is actually pretty small-minded to begin with. Even if somebody didn't put it together or you haven't seen it because it's maybe somebody's kitchen table all-star deck, doesn't mean that somebody else hasn't done it before already anyway. So just build what you want to have fun, build it as best you can, enjoy it to the fullest, and it's okay if it's not original or not. Heck, most of us that make content create content over the course of 6 or 8 weeks or maybe even 12 weeks of a season, we play similar decks. Sometimes we have a couple of cards swapped different for taste or flavor or personal play style, but still, it's not like it's an original idea. That's okay too. Just understand there's a lot of Magic out there to be played on all types of levels. And if nothing else, I hope these ideas help you prevent just running into just basic simple issues that a lot of people hit all the time when they're deck building. As always, if you haven't, please remember to like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, because that lets you be notified every time I have a video up and lets me know you appreciate the content I'm doing. Also, if you have any other tips, let me know down in the description. Or actually, not in the description, let me know down in the comment section. Actually, if you have any other tips or things that you've run into, or what you think about this advice, or if you like these types of ideas at all or these videos. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.